friends, this is Megan Carter from the Hendry Winery in Napa Valley. We're delighted that you have in your possession one of the Hendry 2018 blending kits. We imagine that this is the first time that many of you have blended your own wine, so we've put together this short video to help you create a wine that you're going to love. Let's get into the kit. This kit is designed to help you make a Bordeaux-inspired blend. Now, over in Bordeaux, France, many of those wines are blends, and they typically are comprised of some combination of Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, and Malbec. In your kit, you have one bottle each of the 2018 Hendry versions of these wines. We've also included some tools that George Hendry uses here in the winery when he's making his own version of a Bordeaux blend. You should have received 2 of these 100 milliliter graduated cylinders, 2 of these larger 5 millimeter pipettes, 4 of these smaller 3 millimeter pipettes, and then a fun Hendry corkscrew to open up all of these fabulous wines, an instruction booklet so you don't need to furiously scribble notes during this video. And we've also included what we are calling the tasting placemat. So you have 2 versions of this. We'll get into the detail on here in a little bit, but you have here detail about each of the 5 wines, as well as a spot in the lower right to record how much of each wine you use when creating your own blend. It would be a real shame to put together a blend you love if you can't recreate it. So that's what's in your kit. Let's talk about what supplies you're going to need to provide in order to make this wine. The most important thing, of course, is glassware. So we're going to do a version of this blend that requires 6 glasses per person. As we go, we'll talk about a couple of ways that you can change your methods to reduce the number of glasses you need, if that's helpful. You may also want a dump bucket of some kind if you either want to spit while you're making your blend, or if you just want to be able to toss the blends that aren't your favorite a little more easily. And then last but not least, you certainly will need something to take some good notes. Again, you're going to want to track the quantities of wines that you're using. All right, so now that we've talked about how to set up the wine, what's in your kit, let's talk about how we actually approach making a blend. So the good news is there is no wrong or right method. Every winemaker you talk to is going to have a slightly different approach, both logistically and philosophically, and they all work. So don't get too caught up in worrying about the proper way to do things. This is meant to be fun. The method I'm going to show you today with these 6 glasses is probably the most precise approach. Again, based on your preferences, what you find most comfortable, the group you're with, you can totally adjust, and we'll talk about how to do that as we go. But we'll run through step by step the approach to making a wine, and along the way talk about some things you might want to consider as you're making your wine. So the first thing you'll want to do is measure out a sample of wine from these bottles into each of the glasses. You're going to leave 1 glass empty. That's going to be your blending glass. You can see I've already poured out the wines here. So I've got my Cabernet Sauvignon, my Merlot, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, and Malbec. I did about 60 milliliters of each wine. You can do any quantity you want, but we do recommend about 30 to 60 milliliters. And to give you an idea of what that looks like, it's about 2 ounces. And that gives you enough wine to both evaluate and then actually use the wine in blending. And I used an important word there, the word evaluate. Before you actually get into the blending, you're going to want to stop, pause, and evaluate each of these wines. It's like cooking. You need to know what you're working with, right? So this is where this tasting placemat comes in handy. We've provided an analysis of the 4 kind of key components you want to think about when making your blend. So what are those components? We've got fruitiness, tannin, body, and acidity. So quick recap about what all of those things mean. So fruitiness refers to how aromatic, how flavorful is the wine? What kind of aromas and what kind of flavors are you getting? You could think about dried fruit, fresh fruit, black fruit, red fruit. There are lots of ways to think about it, but how much of that is coming through when you smell the wine? The second component is tannin. Tannin is responsible for that dry mouth, astringent, kind of fuzzy teeth or fuzzy tongue sensation you get when you drink a big glass of red wine like a Cabernet Sauvignon. The next measure is body. Another word people like to use for body is mouthfeel. And people like to use the analogy of cream versus skim milk. Cream would be like a full-bodied wine. It kind of coats the mouth, it's there, it feels very heavy on your tongue, whereas skim milk, it's very light. You take a sip, it's there and gone. So that would be a lighter bodied wine. And then the final component to consider is acidity. So acidity can be measured by how much your mouth is watering on the sides of your tongue and underneath your tongue when you first take a sip, and then how long your mouth continues to water after you've had that sip. And the reason that Bordeaux blends and many other blends are so beloved is that these component wines have varying levels of things like tannin and acid and fruitiness and body. So they can be combined in really endless permutations to create a wine that you really love. So we really encourage you to, as we said, first stop, evaluate the wines, think about these components. We've included some notes of our own on this tasting placemat, but evaluate them for yourself and see what you think about each of these wines. That will be important information as you start your blend. You may decide, I really want to create a tannic blend, or I want a fruit-forward blend. Understanding these different components will help you both get started and then adjust your blend as you go. So you've set up your wines, you've evaluated, you know what you're working with. Now's the fun part. Now's where we get to blend. So when I evaluated these wines, I was really struck by the fruitiness and the softness, the sort of the softer tannins that we found in the Merlot. And personally, I like sort of softer, less tannic red wine, so I would like to start with a lot of Merlot in this sample. So let's get to blending, and this is where all of our tools come in handy. So I'm gonna aim for about a 60 milliliter final blend. That's like the pour that we have here. Remember, of course, as you make your blend, the volume is gonna get bigger and bigger. So you may wanna start with smaller quantities than you imagine would be necessary. So I'm gonna aim for a 60 milliliter blend. So if I want a good base of Merlot, I'm gonna do about 30 milliliters. So that's where my graduated cylinder comes in handy. And because I'm using so much, I'm gonna pour straight out of the bottle. So I'm gonna aim for 30 milliliters here, all right. And then I'm going to add that to my blending glass. Now, again, we've talked about, if you wanna reduce the amount of glasses you're using, if there are only two of you, you could each make your blend in the graduated cylinder. That works perfectly well too. Again, whatever makes you sort of most comfortable. All right, so I've got my 30 milliliters of Merlot. Something else that intrigued me when I evaluated these wines is I really love the aromatics in the Petit Verdot. I thought that was so interesting. So I'm gonna use about 15 milliliters of it. I wanna give a good, healthy slug of it here. So in this case, I'm just gonna pour straight out of the glass into my cylinder. It's a little more than I thought, about 20 milliliters of Merlot. And it is handy to have a napkin handy. There will be drips as you make this, so don't do this on grandma's lace tablecloth or anything like that. All right, and then I'm just gonna round this out with about 3 milliliters each of my remaining wines. So I've got a little bit of Malbec here, and this is where the little pipettes can come in handy. Those are just 3 milliliters, so I've got some Malbec. I've got my Cabernet Franc here. And finally, I've got my Cabernet Sauvignon. All right. So now, before we taste, the most important part, or arguably the most important part, you're gonna wanna write down what you actually did there. So I'm gonna note that I started with 30 milliliters of Merlot. In the end, it was more like 20 milliliters of Petit Verdot, and then 3 milliliters each, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, and Malbec. As we said earlier, if you get to the end and love it and can't recreate it, you're in trouble. So I've written it down, and now I get to taste and evaluate. All right, you may decide at this point, you've hit it out of the park. Could be done. But odds are you might want to tweak a little bit. And that's again where this tasting placemat comes in handy. So for example, I may decide, this needs a little more acidity, and it also needs maybe a touch more tannin. So I'm gonna look at these wines here and the little measurements I have, and it looks like Merlot and Petit Verdot, ironically, the wines I started with, are the most acidic. And of the two, Petit Verdot is far more tannic. So if I want to use that, a little more of it, I'm going to go ahead and grab maybe just another 3 milliliters of Petit Verdot, add that here, blend it up, and evaluate again. So I'll stop there. You can keep iterating for as long as you want, but hopefully this gives you at least an idea of how to approach this blending kit. As we said, there's no wrong or right way. You know, this is a very precise approach, very fastidious with our notes. You know, you could have a party, you could line up these bottles, you could give everybody, you know, stick the graduated or the pipettes in there, pull out a sample, and people could just blend in their glass, not take notes, just make something they love. And that would be totally fine too. We really just hope that you enjoy the process and that you enjoy these wines. So however you approach it, we hope that you have a good time. And of course, we hope that you love your final blend. We're really excited to see what everyone comes up with. So we hope that you'll document this process, tag us on social media, and describe your blend. You can use the hashtag #MyHendryBlend, and you can find us on Instagram at Hendry Wines and on Facebook at Hendry Ranch Winery, Napa Valley. Thank you so much for tuning in, and cheers.